Welcome to the debate. Today we are tackling a really fundamental strategic challenge in enterprise data management, and that's the vast gap between just having data and actually making actionable decisions with it. Our source material really highlights that many organizations are, well, they're sitting on a goldmine of fleet data but are structurally incapable of translating that raw potential into a high-value, actionable, a critical financial intervention. We're looking at the dashboard not as a display, but as a mechanism for compulsory strategic action.
Most managers. The sheer proliferation of reports generates this data clutter, this noise that actively prevents effective management.
Absolutely. So the central question for our discussion is this. Is the methodology of the smart KPI and exception-based management the only viable pathway for modern fleet management, enabling the professional to go from a technical coordinator to a strategic partner? Or does the very stringent filtering and rejection of all that contextual data introduce new and perhaps unacceptable risks to long-term control? I'm going to argue that data without mandatory action is an operational burden, and that the future demands a rigorous focus on exceptions and high-impact decision support. And I'll be challenging that complete rejection of what you're calling data archaeology, the contextual view.
While I agree that exception-based management is undeniably the key to achieving operational efficiency and fighting that alert fatigue, I believe true strategic control requires visibility that extends beyond the immediate red flag alerts. We have to define that threshold very, very carefully, because ignoring the systemic context, well, it risks blinding us to slow-moving fundamental failures.
Position statements. Okay, so the current state of affairs is, I think, defined by managers confusing observation with control. Simply viewing data, for instance, noting that the fleet traveled, say, 1.2 million kilometers last month, is just data archaeology. It's a look entirely in the rearview mirror. This represents the data clutter that prevents managers from doing their primary duty: risk mitigation and cost management. So, to break this cycle, we have to fundamentally redefine what a key performance indicator is.
The rule is simple, and it has to be uncompromising. If an indicator does not compel a specific high-value action, it is not a KPI. It's just text on a screen. And I agree entirely with your critique of passive observation. We have to prioritize decisions.
Right.
So the difference between a worthless metric and a smart KPI is its utility. A worthless metric merely notes a 5% consumption increase. A smart KPI, on the other hand, delivers actionable insight. It says 12 specific vehicles exceeded their theoretical consumption curve by 15% on Route A. This immediately identifies the culprit, it isolates the cause, and it mandates a clear action, a high-impact intervention. This shift in focus is frankly vital. It allows the fleet manager to evolve from a reactive technical role into a proactive cost and carbon impact manager, transforming them into the strategic financial partner the CFO actually needs.
And from a different perspective, though I must affirm the necessity of prioritizing high-value actions, eliminating vanity metrics is key. Where I introduce friction is in the rigid definition required by pure exception-based management, which demands the system remain silent the vast majority of the time. While that operational silence is crucial for preventing alert fatigue, relying exclusively on discrete anomalies, like only alerting on a $5,000 contract penalty, risks obscuring systemic slow burn problems that don't immediately cross that high-cost threshold. The system, in effect, sacrifices strategic foresight for operational speed.
But isn't operational speed the essence of efficiency?
For daily tasks, yes, of course. But we have to question the implication that all non-actionable data is inherently useless. Certain contextual metrics, while they might not trigger an immediate high-value action, provide the necessary baseline and trend identification required for long-term policy evolution. We are so focused on defining the immediate intervention that we risk undermining the very foundation of the fleet's structural health. So the line between a prioritized alert and necessary contextual tracking, it has to be defined by the system's architecture, not just by what triggers a financial fine.
The philosophical divide here is really centered on managerial time. If a manager is spending more time generating reports than executing high-impact decisions, they've lost their strategic mandate. The core value of the intelligent dashboard is directing that manager to the necessary high-impact decision, like optimizing the rotation rate of those 12 specific vehicles to avoid asset replacement, instead of blindly authorizing the purchase of 5 new ones. That measurable efficiency is the strategic win. To demand that the operational interface also display the health of the 98% that is functioning is just to invite the very data clutter we're trying to escape.
I understand the value of directed efficiency, I do, but I find the binary premise that data is either action or noise to be too restrictive. Let's look deeper into your example. The actionable insight about the 12 vehicles is defined by a 15% consumption breach. Okay, but what was the antecedent? What strategic observation first suggested that 15% was even the optimal threshold for an intervention? It was likely the overarching observation that the fleet's average efficiency, the collective data archaeology, was trending in the wrong direction, suggesting a systemic flaw that required a deep dive and, well, the creation of a rule in the first place.
But that trend analysis is not part of the operational dashboard. It belongs to the strategic planning layer. We have to architecturally separate these functions. If the manager has to actively seek out and interpret that trend data every single morning, the system is failing its primary duty, which is exception management. The system must surface the exception, not force the manager to hunt for it.
But that hunting is precisely what is necessary for proactive strategy. I mean, if the intelligent dashboard only alerts when that 15% threshold is crossed, what critical information is being missed if the entire fleet consumption shifts gradually upward by, say, 8% over 6 months? That 8% drift, which is a massive accumulation of unplanned costs, it never crosses your defined high-penalty, high-value alert threshold. And therefore, it remains functionally invisible to the operational manager who is relying solely on immediate exceptions.
Okay, that addresses the immediate operational risk. But my concern is that framing limits our strategic foresight. The architecture you propose requires monitoring every line, every second. Who pays the salary for the manager whose time is consumed, tracking a non-critical 8% shift that has not yet resulted in a contractual or catastrophic failure? That is precisely why the concept of the augmented fleet manager is so vital.
Okay, so let's talk about that.
I am not suggesting we ignore the 8% drift. I'm suggesting the architecture must be intelligent enough to transform that drift from passive context into a dynamic macro exception. This is where the augmented fleet manager, the AI layer, comes into play. That 8% cumulative cost increase should be surfaced not as a detailed operational alert for Vehicle 47, but as a high-level trend analysis that dictates a policy intervention, perhaps a change in supplier or a maintenance schedule. The AI acts as a sophisticated filter that consumes the 90% context and presents the management team with the strategic question, not the operational chore.
I appreciate that distinction, I do, but the complexity lies in ensuring that the AI layer is trusted and functional. If we rely purely on the alert system inherent in exception-based management, the system introduces a high risk if the anomaly thresholds are set incorrectly. I mean, if the system is mandated to be silent 90% of the time, what data science model prevents the 8% drift from just being relegated to the archives? The intelligence needs to reside in a separate machine learning model dedicated solely to calculating predictive failure probability, which is completely distinct from the operational deviation alert system.
Well, the models are separate, yes, but the output must converge on action. The failure isn't the system being silent, it's paralysis. The manager is drowning in data but starved for quantified actionable insight. The ML model is designed precisely to prevent the accumulation of maintenance debt that hasn't yet led to a critical component failure. It takes that historical, contextual data archaeology, projects it forward, and issues an alert not when the vehicle fails, but when the probability of failure crosses a high-risk threshold. That is still an exception, it's just a predictive one, not a reactive one.
I agree that predictive failure probability is the ideal outcome, but the manager still needs access to the underlying context to, calibrate their trust in the model. Consider alert fatigue. We know that if the operational dashboard is constantly generating noise, managers tune out. But if the strategic dashboard is only screaming about policy failure, how does the manager verify whether the overall economic health of the fleet is actually sound? If we completely firewall off the 90% contextual data, we lose the reference frame needed to validate the AI's strategic findings.
The context should be available, but it should require a specific defined request. It cannot be part of the primary decision interface. We are focusing on high-value, high-impact deviation, the specific contract penalties or critical maintenance omissions that immediately threaten margins. Managing 500 vehicles by looking at every single line is structurally impossible. The architecture of the future must be self-filtering. The ideal system is not one that shows everything. It's one that shows exactly what needs to be fixed right now and why.
Okay, but if the manager's mandate is truly strategic and aspirational to be the CFO's right hand, they must be prepared to articulate the full health of the fleet, not just the list of outstanding problems.
Right, and the intelligent dashboard acts as the fleet manager's shield in the committee room. It shifts the entire discussion away from technical requirements toward quantified financial optimization. When you focus solely on exceptions and proven interventions, you demonstrate strategic competence. You walk in with the action you took yesterday that saved the company $10,000, presenting a record of mandatory high-impact interventions. You are no longer defending the fleet, you are monetizing your optimization capabilities.
That is a crucial defense tactic, but let me question whether the absolute rejection of the contextual view impairs broader necessary reporting. If management is solely by exception, does the manager lose the ability to quickly summarize the fleet's overall stability and general efficiency trends? Executive summaries often require that baseline of normalcy. If my dashboard is only screaming about the 10% that is broken, I risk losing the necessary data visualization of the 90% that is operating efficiently, which is often required by executive summaries even if it doesn't trigger an immediate high-value action. The CFO might ask, is this a localized fire or is the whole house burning down slowly?
But the data for that stability summary is still collected. We are arguing about its place on the operational interface. We must treat the contextual data that requires analysis as structurally separate from the exception data that mandates intervention. If the manager is focused on mandated intervention, they are strategic. If they are focused on simply summarizing the status quo, they are performing data archaeology.
But the strength of the system relies on the fluidity between those two worlds. To optimize the rotation rate of those 12 specific vehicles, the manager needs the exception alert. But to prove that the fundamental fleet policy itself is sound and requires no systemic overhaul, a necessary strategic report for the CFO, they need the contextual data that verifies the health of the other 98%. The ability to contextualize the exception within the whole provides the necessary intellectual ammunition to demonstrate that the exception is a localized failure, not a systemic collapse requiring a capital overhaul.
I acknowledge the need for intellectual ammunition. But the moment the contextual data becomes visually prominent on the operational dashboard, we risk backsliding into data clutter and confusing viewing with steering. The architecture has to prioritize the high-value action, and the contextual summary should be available only via a secondary strategic report, filtered and pre-digested by the augmented intelligence. The onus should be on the manager to prove the 98% is healthy, not on the system to constantly reassure them.
Conclusion. Ultimately, the future of fleet management is the evolution of the dashboard from an operational burden, a dead weight, to a strategic leverage point. The core test must remain stringent. Does the indicator mandate a direct, high-value action? If the answer is no, it should be relegated to the background analytical engine.
The efficiency gains delivered by truly smart KPIs and exception-based management are just too significant to risk diluting the focus with passive contextual data.
The efficiency gains delivered by truly smart KPIs and exception-based management are just too significant to risk diluting the focus with passive contextual data. I have to concede that the intelligence and prioritization derived from exception-based management are non-negotiable for achieving operational success and, frankly, for preventing alert fatigue. However, I maintain that a truly strategic system must find a sophisticated, architecturally sound way to integrate the data archaeology, the necessary context required for long-term planning and proactive policy adjustments, with the immediate high focus on action.
The challenge is not rejecting context. It's using augmented intelligence to intelligently filter and structure it so it surfaces as strategic insight rather than operational noise.
And that tension between the need for immediate, targeted action and the necessary foundational context is exactly where the most valuable insights reside. I think we both agree that the dashboard has to evolve significantly, moving past simple visualization to become a true partner in financial decision-making.
Indeed, the ongoing challenge for experts is ensuring that our pursuit of operational efficiency does not inadvertently limit our strategic foresight. The conclusion, as always, remains with the listener.
Thank you for joining us on The Debate.